Hey everybody, welcome back to the Introversion podcast. This is a different sort of episode today. It's a special episode. I had to do this one right now because I've actually recorded an episode with my friend Ryan a couple nights ago and with my friend Karen earlier today. And as much as I'd love to get those edited and out there for y'all to listen to, I have to push those back because if you've been listening, you've probably heard me mentioning that I wanted to do a podcast episode specifically on The Last Dance, the documentary on Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. And I have to do it now because we are at episode number 23 of the Introversion podcast. So I had to do it. I wasn't going to not do the Last Dance episode for episode number 23. I mean, that would, if I did it as episode 25 or 26, that would just be flat out wrong and disrespectful. So here we go. Let's get into The Last Dance. For those of you who aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, there was a documentary called The Last Dance. I'm not sure when it was released. It was sometime earlier this year, probably, I don't know, March or February, something like that. Or at least that was when I first heard about it. I was pretty late in the game, no pun intended. But it seemed like everybody else had already heard it and was talking about it. And then I finally got around to watching it. And I loved it on so many levels, such that I have to do a whole episode on it because it's not just about basketball. It's not about just sports. It's so much more than that. And that's what I want to share about today is how, my thoughts in watching it and just kind of reminiscing and the nostalgia factor and the takeaways, the lessons, the life lessons, just the ways that it moved me and got me thinking in different ways, the ways that it inspired me. So here we go. First off, before I start getting into things, hearkening back to the Unfriend episode, I just want to put this out there. If you're a Facebook friend of mine and you're going to argue with me that Michael Jordan is not the greatest basketball player of all time, you may as well go ahead and unfriend me because I just can't deal with irrational people anymore. I have to draw the line somewhere. I'm half kidding on that. But anyway, half kidding aside, let's get into this. So first off, I want to say, who is this podcast for? So this might not necessarily be for my normal listeners, so I kind of want to preface things a bit here. So what I want to say is if it's on your watch list, like you just haven't gotten around to watching it yet, but you want to watch The Last Dance, I would say you might want to put off listening to this podcast episode until you watch the documentary first. I think you might be hungering for even more after watching the documentary. So that might be a good time to actually switch over here to listen to my podcast as sort of a post log, sort of an addendum to the documentary, if you want to keep the experience going, but you ran out of episodes of The Last Dance. So that being said, if you don't care about basketball, if you don't even know who Michael Jordan is, that's fine. If you don't really have any interest in watching the documentary, that's fine. So you might still find some value in listening to what I have to say today. Maybe it's a bit like a little history lesson in sports, but I swear this just goes beyond sports. It's like pop culture. It's history. It's like Michael Jordan, just one of those iconic figures. It's like Muhammad Ali. It's like Michael Jackson, it's like these epic people in human history, right? Who have achieved such great feats. And I just think people should know about it. I just think people should know about Jordan and what happened back in the 90s with his basketball career and all this. So yeah, all that being said, let's get into this. So I have a few bullet point items here I want to discuss. One thing as I was watching the documentary, it was interesting because I was kind of wondering if this is a documentary more about Michael Jordan or is it a documentary more about the Chicago Bulls and their dynasty in the 90s. So if you're listening to this, you probably know already, but basically they won 6 titles in the 90s. I think there was 1 year in between. So They won, basically they did a three-peat and then another three-peat. So that's what we're talking about here. The documentary is basically all about the epic story of the Bulls and how the team was formed and all the issues and the drama behind the scenes, and Michael Jordan, how he came to be who he was and all his greatness, going back to his youth and, early childhood life and also in college at UNC. So I don't know. It's just really great the way they put it together. I have to commend them for just piecing it all together in a way that's just like I just felt like I was learning as much as I thought I knew about Michael Jordan and the Bulls, having lived through it all those years. Yes, it was a blast from the past, and it was like this, nostalgic ride down memory lane. But I also feel like I learned a lot of little tidbits and things that I either don't recall or I didn't know in the first place. It was cool. It was just thoroughly entertaining and informative and all that. So, but I don't want to keep harping on this. I don't want this to just be like an extended Yelp review where I talk about how great it was. I give it 5 stars. Like, no, that's not what I want this episode to be. So yeah, let's make this a little more personal in terms of my takeaways from it. And, one thing I will say is that throughout watching it, I had goosebumps a lot of the time. So it was just, it's amazing how you can just be staring at a screen, right? You're staring at your TV watching something, and it's just, it can get such an emotional rise out of you, just from watching a show. And I'm just like, wow, like emotions just overcoming you. And, you think about all the things that happened in your own life back then in the 90s, right? And it's crazy how life is, right? Like the arc of life, the timeline of life. It's like, I think for a lot of people, there might be some particular traumatic events that you remember from 20 or 30 years ago, but I don't know. I think my theory is that for most people, we're so busy living our day-to-day life that there are obviously so many details of our life from decades ago. Yes, they're a part of us, but we just forget about them, like they're just somewhere in the recesses of our mind, but it's almost as if it doesn't matter because we don't think about them, and to think about the memories and to, to reminisce in that way, it kind of gives more value to those experiences and those memories, because otherwise they're kind of nothing, right? What are memories really if you don't actively remember them, right? So there's that. And I just want to say that for me personally in the 90s, I was basically, the first part of the 90s, I was basically in high school in Germany. And kind of the more significant portion of the 90s, I was in college at Northwestern near Chicago. So the obvious choice would be for me to be a Chicago Bulls fan, but also even before I went to Northwestern, even before I landed in Chicago, I was already a Bulls fan because, like many people across the world, we were all just huge fans of Michael Jordan because he was just a force to be reckoned with. He was just poetry in motion, as I've heard in the documentary and said many times before. He was, for me, Michael Jordan was an artist. If basketball is the art form, he was the master painter. He was the master creator within the art form of basketball. And yeah, I just I'll come out and say it right now, but then I might repeat it later on. But when Jordan retired and the Bulls' legacy was over, basically at the end of the 90s, I stopped watching basketball. I actually still continue to watch a little bit of NCAA, like specifically March Madness, but I stopped watching the NBA. I think it probably just trickled on for another couple of years, but definitely by the early 2000s, I was just kind of over basketball. It's like, to me, that is how much of an impact Jordan had on me, but also the sport itself. Like, I just felt like, what's the point of watching basketball if Michael Jordan isn't playing? For some people that might sound crazy or insane, especially for somebody like me who actually really likes basketball, and I played my whole life. Obviously, those who know me, I've always been way more into soccer than basketball. Soccer is my main jam, but I also played basketball as a kid growing up. So I love basketball as well. But so I'm in Chicago, or I'm near Chicago at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois, and continuing on the nostalgia subject. So I had a good group of friends, these guys, and there was like Peter and John Moore and John Weiss and John Babawi, everybody named John, a couple other guys, and we all got along really well, like freshman year, sophomore year. And this one guy, Peter, this one friend of mine, Peter, he was from nearby there in Northern Illinois. So a bunch of us, we would go to his house. We would go to his parents' house. And I got to know his younger sisters and his parents. And his mom in particular was just an amazing person. And, people who know me know I love my mom more than anybody on the planet. But Peter's mom was kind of like a mom away from home. She was kind of my remote mom, and she was really great. Just an amazing human being. I felt loved by her, and I think all of us guys did. And we loved her back, and she took care of us. I just remember she'd be making baklava and just all this Egyptian kind of Middle Eastern food, and it was just like really great times. And again, it's one of those things where we're so busy with our day-to-day lives, we don't really think about it. We forget about all of these precious moments in our lives, but all of a sudden you find yourself watching a Chicago Bulls Michael Jordan documentary, and it takes you right back there. And it's amazing, that power of nostalgia and memories. I get a little emotional now, just thinking about it. But so just really, really good times, and it's interesting too to think about sports in my life. And nowadays I don't know. Y'all have been listening to the podcast for a while now. I may come across as a rather disillusioned guy, right? And I'm kind of jaded. I'm kind of burnt out. I'm kind of like over a lot of things. And, I've had numerous episodes here where I talk about how I'm fed up with things. And, I had that one episode last month or so. I think it was process of elimination, right? And I talked about how I've kind of ruled out playing soccer. I've just gotten too old for it. I kind of stopped playing FIFA, stopped betting on soccer. I kind of said I wasted a lot of time last year on that. Didn't really pan out. And I was like, maybe I should stop watching NFL, stop wasting time with that. They just drag these games on for long periods of time. And like I said, I haven't watched NBA in like 15, 20 years. So that's already out. So, it's really hard. As much as I love soccer, it's kind of just come down to watching the sport now. But with this whole pandemic thing, seeing the games happen, and it's almost like it's just a scrimmage. It's just professional athletes kicking a ball around. But it's like I don't know if their heart's in it, but my heart certainly isn't in it. Yeah, I just don't care right now. I don't care to watch soccer, whether it's Premier League or whatever. I mean, God forbid, we'll see what happens when the World Cup rolls around, because the World Cup is always my favorite sporting event ever. And the fact that I can still get up for that high every 4 years, is something. But if the World Cup is to somehow happen now in the next couple of years, and there's no fans in the stadiums, and it's just behind closed doors with simulated sound effects in the stadium, and I'm like, that would seriously depress me, because I love the World Cup. Those of you who know me, I love the World Cup, and I get into it. It's like I just want everything else in my life to stop for 1 month when I get into the World Cup. I just love it that much. But my point here, what I'm saying is that other than the World Cup, which who knows, with the pandemic thing, like if they shut that down too, I'm like, I don't care anymore about sports. And all I have is kind of my memories of childhood and leading up to, I would say, the Bulls in the 90s and watching those games, those playoff games in the NBA Finals with my buddies during college. In a way, that was kind of the the last dance for me with regard to sports, in terms of like professionally, like watching sports or being a fan of sports or athletes. I mean, it certainly was for the sport of basketball, but it's weird. I don't know. It's not just basketball, but NFL as well. I watched so much as a kid and I really loved it. And it's just funny how you grow up, I guess, at a certain point and you're just busy with other things in life and you just don't care anymore about sports. I don't know. It's weird, but I know I'm kind of rambling here. I don't want to go off on this tangent, but I just want to make that point known that sports were such an integral part of my life growing up. And then they weren't so much, I would say, for the last 15, 20 years. I still enjoy soccer a lot, but this year in the pandemic, I don't even enjoy soccer at all anymore. So there's really no sports I'm interested in at the moment. But yeah, so back to the Bulls and Jordan in the 90s, it was just like such great times. And I think back to those memories I had and eating baklava at Peter's house and spending time with his family and friends. And it's just like, that's life, that's life worth remembering, and I think about so much time that goes by in our adulthood, and I don't know if I'm the only one who thinks this much about things or if other people feel this way too, but I just feel like how much of life is completely forgettable, And maybe it has something to do with being a parent or not being a parent. Because I reckon if you're a parent, the cycle kind of repeats itself, right? So you get to see your child walk for the first time, and that's like a big, beautiful thing. And you get to hear them say their first words and see them go off to kindergarten and, high school graduation and all. Like you kind of relive everything you lived as a childhood through sort of vicariously through your kids at that point. But for those of us who are entering into our 30s and 40s and we're starting to resign ourselves to the fact that we're not going to have kids, and not that we're like depressed or bummed out about that, because having kids isn't necessarily for everybody, but still, as you get older, if you're not going to have kids, I feel like Christmas doesn't really have that special magical feel anymore as an adult. Especially if there's nothing romantic about it. You're not like in love with somebody or something like that. And there's no kids in the picture. It's like, what's the point of Christmas? Especially if it's not about Jesus. If you've left Christianity like I have, it's kind of like, just a commercial holiday. It's just like, whatever. I like some Christmas songs, but it's like, whatever. So yeah. And I know I'm seriously rambling here and I'm just kind of embracing this right now because clearly this is going to be an episode not just about basketball and not just about Michael Jordan, but I'm just using that as a jumping off point for all of these feelings and thoughts and memories that watching The Last Dance has triggered. I just wanted to say all that, just get some things off my head. And I don't have all this scripted. I'm just kind of rambling, but yeah, watching The Last Dance was a nostalgic experience for me. And it's cool though. It's cool because I don't know off the top of my head how many things I could just watch and it triggers so much emotion from lived experiences from 20, 30 years ago, And The Last Dance succeeded at that. They just did such an amazing job at capturing that time. It's totally a time capsule experience. Just seeing all the sports graphics and the commentators and Bob Costas, who still looks the same age now as he did then, but somehow he still looks younger there. And you're like, and listening to Marv Albert, and it takes you back. Sometimes I think college was just kind of a drag. And then after that, I moved to San Francisco, and that was kind of a drag. And sometimes I just think too much of my life just went by, and I'm not super excited about it, and nothing really special happened. But I don't know. Watching The Last Dance was a little bit of a good reminder of, yes, there were things that happened in my life, and there were things worth remembering. There were people worth remembering. Yeah, it was a good, healthy reminder of all that. Yeah. So moving on from the nostalgia factor, while we're still here on this subject, I was texting with my buddy Peter, and we haven't talked a whole lot over the last several years, just occasionally here and there. And but we were texting consistently. It was kind of like this ritual. I would watch an episode of The Last Dance during lunch, and as I'm watching it, I would text him, just kind of like, oh, remember this, remember that. Like, oh God. And at one point, I'm just going to read kind of what I texted him at one point. And basically, Peter was Christian and I was Christian, and we were in a Bible study group together, and that's who we were then. Fast forward, I guess, 20 years now or whatever, and he's still Christian. I'm not. But I said this to him as I was watching Jordan play and everything, and I was like, man, I will say, I don't have faith in God anymore, but I always had faith in Jordan. It was a sense of peace. Any nervousness I had would calm down. Even if they lost a game, it wouldn't matter in the end. It's like I knew Michael Jordan had it all under control, and we'd win in the end. And Peter replied, yeah, he was unbelievable. And I said, yeah, true greatness. And not to sort of overly inflate it and make it into a big, huge deal in an artificial way, but if you've been listening to the podcast, or if you already know me, my life is kind of a weird life that's growing up in the military, growing up in the church as a preacher's kid, and all this stuff, and how my life was just bits and pieces throughout my life without even knowing it. I think I was always craving for something to believe in, something solid. And I think the fact that I am the jaded person that I am today, in large part, it's because everything kind of just let me down, or I never really was able to attach or cling to something solid and real and lasting. Something or somebody I could count on through thick and thin, no matter what. And I know Michael Jordan is out there, and I don't know him, and he doesn't know me, and there's nothing relational about it or whatever. But I think the sentiment I was getting at when I texted Peter there was, it was just something that I could witness and have a calm assuredness that everything was going to be okay, And granted, it's just a basketball game we're talking about here, but when you're younger, and the emotions and everything I've talked about, you're so much more vested in it than just being a sport, right? So I think that, in a way, in itself, just meant a lot to me, that I could enjoy. It's almost like I could enjoy watching a game because, like I said, I knew in the end Jordan would win it. And, even if it was game 3 or game 4, and for some reason they didn't win that game, I could still have assurance that, we'll get him in game 5. We'll get him in game 6. We'll get him in game 7 for sure. And I don't know, to some of you listening, it might sound silly, right? But for me, I had nothing solid in my life. I wanted to have that assurance from God. And I believed in that my whole life, but it fell through. It wasn't real to me, especially when I needed it to be real. My faith in God, my faith in Jesus, and all of that. And I know it's ridiculous, it's silly to compare Michael Jordan with like God. But these are, is this making sense? Like a lot of things at the end of the day, they just come down to feelings and emotions and how something makes you feel. And that's how I felt. There was always that verse like, on Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. It was one of those hymns. And that's what I sang, and that's what I read, and that's what I heard preached for so many years. But at the end of the day, I didn't have that kind of comfort and peace of mind and assurance in God the way that I did when watching the Bulls play in the 90s and knowing that Jordan was in control. Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. As silly as it might sound to some people, it meant something to me. It meant something to me that I could just chill out and relax because somebody else was in charge, somebody who I could trust and count on, Because you take Jordan out of the picture and just like regular life, me going out there in the 2000s and the 2010s, I feel like, yeah, God, nah, whatever, don't believe in it anymore. I think it was just wishful thinking on my part all along. I wish there was a God that had a plan for my life and, that Jesus was the lover of my soul and all that stuff. But when I saw my friends just marry off and disappear, I couldn't help but feel left behind. And that's a very real, palpable feeling. That sensation overcomes you, that feeling of loss and isolation and that feeling of being left behind, So, yeah, as silly as an example as it may be, that is something I can definitively point to and say, wow, I had faith in Michael Jordan and he didn't let me down, which is a lot more than I can say for most other things in life, So, yeah. So there's that. Okay, so this is another point I want to make about The Last Dance and about Michael Jordan. Again, if you're going to argue with me about this, you may as well not even be my friend. I should unfriend you. But Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player of all time, at least in our lifetimes. Who knows what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years from now if there's another great that rises. But as I see it right now, it is undisputed, is undoubtedly the truth. Michael Jordan is the GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. And as I watched episode after episode and the timeline kind of going back and forth and the various stages in his career, and I was just like, you see everything that goes in to being the greatest. The sacrifice, the level of sacrifice that it takes. It's not just about having natural talent. It's not just about working hard. I see it in Jordan and how he approached every situation and every problem where he wouldn't settle for anything less than being the best. And that's how he treated his teammates, and that's how he treated the management and just everything. Like, he had to be the best, the team had to be the best, and you had to win at all costs. Like, you just had to win. And if you don't win, if you're not the best, it's like the best or nothing at all. Sinatra. All or nothing at all. All or nothing at all. It's inspiring for sure, right? To see somebody be the greatest. Yeah, you love to see it, the behind the scenes and to see how somebody can become the greatest. But it also got me thinking about myself and my own life and my priorities and what my aspirations are in life. And it's something that it kind of clicked in my head, that something I already know and I've thought about before, but it's like, it allowed me to not feel so bad about it, I guess, is one way of putting it. Where, like, podcasting, for example, right? Like I just started podcasting. Yes, I had the Confusianity podcast last year, but I've taken it to a whole nother level this year with the Introversion podcast. And I started at the end of May, and here we are now at the start of September. So it's been, I guess, coming up on 4 months now of the podcast. And here we are on episode 23. And I love the podcasting thing. I'm really enjoying this. I'm really enjoying the conversations I'm having with people. I'm getting good feedback from people. And I'm seeing the viewership growing each month steadily. And I like what's happening here. You know, for me, this is sort of a bright spot of this pandemic period in 2020. And when December 31st rolls around, that's what I would like to see and feel, is to look back at this year and look at a tangible list of, wow, I did this, I did that, I did this, I accomplished. I mean, right now it's not about experiencing a lot of things, you know, like forget travel, forget about adventures and romance and all these things out there in the world, forget about all that. But given the circumstances of me being stuck at home in my apartment, isolated and alone, I would love to look back at sort of my resume of 2020 and be like, and feel like, wow, started this podcast, grew this podcast, relaunched introversion.com at the early part of the year, got into making music, which is something I had been talking about doing for so long. And I'm still wanting to get more into it, and I'm running out of time for this year, but I do want to start producing some music tracks coming up this fall, I guess, into the winter. But all of these things, you know, they finally reopened the gym a month or so ago, and now I'm getting back in shape, and that feels good. But at the end of this year, I want to look back and be proud of what I've achieved and accomplished despite all of the shitty circumstances of 2020, right? So I'm going on about that, but I bring up the podcasting thing, for example, because I'm like, do I want to be the greatest? Do I want to be the best podcaster in the world and this to be the absolute best podcast in the world, talking about personal issues and life in a raw way, and creativity and politics and how all of these things piece together in a human life, and not just my life, but with the other people I'm interviewing and interacting with? Like, there's a beautiful thing there. And I feel it taking shape, taking form every week. And I feel like I'm getting better at it and I'm enjoying it more. And hopefully you are enjoying it more as well. And hopefully a lot of you out there find it refreshing, that it's just raw. You know, there's not a whole lot of small talk bullshit on this podcast. It's just, I'm always keeping it real, you know? And, yeah, but back to this idea of the best, like, is that on my radar or my goal for me to become the best podcaster in the world and for this to be the number one podcast at the top of the charts, right? Yeah. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, no, that's not my goal. If that were my goal, I would literally have to sacrifice, again, coming back to this idea of greatness and sacrifice. Like, I would have to sacrifice so much else in life. Like, instead of me going to the gym for an hour and going for a run for another 30 minutes and doing all that, like, I would probably want to take that 2 or 3 hours instead and put it into the podcast, market it more, spend more money, like, get the word out there more, be more aggressive, and, you know, maybe record 3 episodes a week, you know, and, maybe get into music production and come up with an original theme and sound effects. Like, there's so many things I could do more to make the podcast better. But at the end of the day, I think, no, it's good. And I'm proud of it. And it's coming along nicely. And if more and more people are listening to it, it is going to get better and better because I am going to put more of myself into it. But my point is, there are also other things that I enjoy so much in life. You know, like, the more time I spend podcasting, that means that's less time that I spend making music, and it's less time that I spend drawing and making art and animation and design and all those other things that I love, you know? So life really comes down to priorities and, it's a unique blend for every person, right? So it was very clear for Michael Jordan, he made basketball his number one thing. Obviously until he tried out baseball, which didn't really go anywhere. But then he was right back at it with basketball, and he climbed back up, and he still was the best at basketball. So, but yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I don't know if that is something that people think about. I think people often look at somebody like Michael Jordan. They think, wow, he's so great. I wish I could be that great, without really thinking about what you're saying, because I do think a lot of us could actually be really great at something, at one thing. And due to the limits of physical ability and age and just whatever other factors, physical limitations. Yeah, I mean, no matter how much you devote yourself to something, you're most likely not going to be the best at it in the world, or certainly not in human history. But you could be pretty damn amazing at whatever it is you devote yourself to. And yeah, for those of you who know me, it's a little bit of my downfall because I spread myself too thin. I'm interested in too many different things. So there's no way I'm ever going to be great. Well, I might be pretty good or great at a lot of things, but I'm never going to be the best. I'm never going to be the best at anything that I do. Maybe on a local level, or I'll be the best in the room at something, but I'm never going to be like the FIFA champion of the world, or even like the FIFA champion of the United States, or even the FIFA champion of the state I'm in. It's like, or countless other examples. But that's a distinction to be made. I think that's something to be pondered, and that's something I thought about, and I thought maybe it's good for people out there listening to think about as well. Because I think sometimes people can get frustrated, like, oh man, Jordan is so great, he's the best. Why do I suck so much? Or why can't I? And it's like, I think the point is to not get down on yourself, but realize it's all about that balance of priorities and choices you make with your life. Whatever it is you're passionate about in life, whether it's your job or your kids, maybe you want to be the best father or the best mother in the world, whatever it is, you can certainly be a lot better at it than you are today. And to some degree, you can be great at it, or maybe one of the best in the world at it, whether you're the scientist or the artist or whatever. But it's going to come at a cost. And watching The Last Dance, I saw the sacrifices that Jordan made in order to be the best. And that's up to him in his heart of hearts. At the end of the day, if he has any regrets, or he wishes he did things differently, or maybe being the best basketball player of all time wasn't as important to him as he thought. I don't think that's the case. I don't think he has regrets. I think he's probably glad that he achieved what he did, and he is the best player of all time. And I'm kind of glad. I'm glad he made those choices because, again, like I mentioned earlier, the impact it had on me, just being able to believe in something in this world, that you can count on to just be amazing, I think he did the world a lot of good. And I think this transcends sports, even if you're not into sports. I just feel like that kind of spirit and just epic force in the world is something to be reckoned with, And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about that point, about being the best and being great, and just to think about the sacrifices, right? And if you're not willing to sacrifice certain things, that's fine. But just know that is what's going on and be comfortable with that. Be comfortable not being the best or the greatest. There's all a spectrum, right? You can be pretty good and great at a lot of things and, call it a life and be satisfied with that. There's no shame in that. But if you want to be the best, you're going to have to just shed off all this other stuff. But anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I think you get it. So kind of related to this is I just wanted to touch briefly on like the pros and cons of being quote unquote competitive. So obviously Jordan is insanely competitive, kind of like clinically, psychotically competitive, and obviously he got into some gambling issues and whatnot. But yeah, it's tied in with this idea of greatness, but like being competitive, I think it can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. And I love how in The Last Dance, Jordan, he he always found fuel for his fire, and it was like if there was somebody in the press who said something that pissed him off, or if some quote from a player from another team, he would just take that quote or take that thing and blow it way out of proportion and use it to fuel his fire. I see that even in a non-competitive environment, he would make it competitive, and it's funny to me watching it happen. And I think he laughed about it and other people laughed about it, talking about it, because like it was so clearly, what it was. It was so apparent. But yeah, it's just another one of those things to think about in your own life, like being competitive, how it's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but I kind of like how Jordan would always manipulate a situation, even if it's just in his mind, even if other people didn't even know about it. He would use the circumstances of the people he was playing against or whatever, the press, to create a competition in his mind to fuel him to win that competition. So I found that kind of interesting, and it got me thinking about that in my own life. And there's definitely been times in my life, I mean, it's actually a pretty recurring theme throughout my life, where because I grew up moving around in the military all the time, and I was the only Indian kid, and I had this crazy long last name, 5 syllables that ends in poo, and it was tough for me. And unfortunately, every time we moved, I felt like I had to start all over again, and I had to prove myself. So in that sense, I couldn't just relax and be myself, because nobody knew who I was. So I had to continually exert more energy into proving myself everywhere we went. And in that sense, I don't want to call it good or bad, but I definitely think it has something that has stuck with me into adulthood. And I don't think it's a good thing, though. It's a form of competitiveness, but for me, I don't think it's a good thing, because I think it's a lot of energy exerted, and I think Jordan exerted the energy in that way too. But for him, it was just to take his insane level of perfection and amazingness to just another level, right? But for me, I don't want to be competitive in that way. I don't want to look at other people around me, even if it's like in the dating scene, like to get a girl or whatever. I don't want it to be like, because I've done that in New York. I think that trend was continuing in my life, where I would see the girls I want to get with, and they don't really pay me attention. They don't really want to get with me because I'm just here on this rung. They want to be with the guy who is white, blonde, blue eyes, makes 7 figures, and has the fancy watch, dresses like the studliest whatever, and has a flashy car and, $1 million condo in Central Park, or, So I did all right. But let's face it, I think with men and women in the dating scene, and at least in New York, it is highly competitive. And the advice often to me as a single guy was, okay, well, get better. If you're not getting the girl of your dreams, the girl you want, if you're tired of settling for girls who are down there, who you feel like you can get a better girl or you deserve a better girl, then you need to up your game. You need to make more money. You need to get more fit. You need to dress better. And I'm all for self-improvement and all that, but you see where I'm going with this. Like it puts you in a competitive mode where you're fighting out other guys for the prize of the woman that you want to get with, right? So I bring that up as just one example, but it's the same thing too, like professionally. Like, do I want to, when I compare myself with my peers, and I don't use LinkedIn really, but when I look on LinkedIn and I get those little pings, those little notifications of my old coworkers, and we were all at the same level back then in the early or mid 2000s at RGA and places that I worked. And I look at them now and I see the articles written about them and I see their titles being updated and they're like executive creative director and global creative officer and, senior, global managerial, whatever, and all this shit. And luckily I've kind of graduated from that whole song and dance the last couple of years. I just really don't care. I could have gone down that path. I could have done the office politics thing and managed teams and, had a fancy title to my name and probably made more money and been more quote unquote successful. But I knew back then that's not really what I wanted. I loved being hands-on. I loved being creative. I didn't want to delegate creativity, So I don't really have regrets in that regard, but yeah, what I'm saying is these are all examples of being competitive with your peers or competitive with other men to get a woman, or if you're a woman, to be competitive with other girls to get the guy, the high value guy or whatever. But yeah, I look at Jordan as the ultimate competitor and I don't think that's necessarily a healthy thing. In fact, a lot of Michael Jordan's behaviors, again, it goes back to my point about sacrifice. Like a lot of Michael Jordan's behaviors that I observed in The Last Dance, not the healthiest life choices. And I'm sure a lot of his relationships with other people kind of suffered for it. And I found it interesting. This is one thing I wanted to mention, but I found it interesting that, again, I'm not quite sure if the focus was intended to be all about Michael Jordan or about the Bulls. It's hard for me to say. I guess it felt like a 50-50 split, maybe a 60-40 split, right? 60% about Jordan, 40% about the Bulls in general. But I found it interesting that there was no mentioning of his wife. I think Juanita Jordan was her name, if I remember correctly, but no mentioning of her. They didn't really show her at all. I don't even know, maybe once at a press conference, just in the background or something. Or his kids. They showed his kids. I guess he had a couple sons. I don't know if he had a daughter later on or anything else, but there was just a couple scenes where they showed his kids bouncing a basketball around, but that was it, So, and I know they don't want to stay off topic, and I'm not faulting the filmmakers for that. They did a really good job of staying on point and staying on focus, but it did leave me wondering, what was his family life like? They did have quotes from his parents and a little bit from his brothers from childhood, but that was about it. So it just left me wondering, I wonder how happy Jordan was with his life as a whole. How his relationship was like with his kids, with his wife, and if those things suffered because of his complete, utter dedication to being the best basketball player in the world. I do wonder about those things. Yeah. All right. So one more, this is a rather controversial point that I want to get into, but there was the one episode in there where it was kind of like politics and how Jordan, I think there was a black congressman or somebody running for office in North Carolina, and he was going up against a white guy who I guess had a history of racism or something. And there was controversy back then. And this is one of those things where I didn't know anything about this at the time when I was younger, back in the 90s or whenever this happened. So for me, this was all new information, right? So as I'm watching this unfold, he got a lot of flack for not being vocal about supporting the black candidate in North Carolina. And what was interesting to me is comparing then in the 90s versus now, right? So now, of course, we have the Colin Kaepernicks of the world, we have the LeBron James, and we have the people taking a knee and boycotting. I mean, they literally just sat out. We're like, hey, we're all not going to show up to play the NBA playoffs now because of some black convict got shot by the cops. So, yeah, the society, the culture we live in today, it's very sort of activist and, woke, right? So it's kind of like this woke thing has I don't want to say infected, but I'm going to say infected. This woke thing has infected kind of every aspect of life. It's in movies, it's in TV shows, and now it's in sports. It's everywhere you look. And look, I'm not saying we don't need activism and that there are not important causes out there worth fighting for, but, and maybe this is me being naive, but as a kid, I didn't know anything about Michael Jordan's personal life or any of these athletes' personal lives. I saw them on the court, and other than Dennis Rodman, who everybody saw his antics off the court, but other than just a wacko exception to the rule here and there, it was all about the sport. And the same goes for NFL. The same goes for, soccer. It's like everything was just more about the sport. And again, maybe I'm naive. As a kid, I just didn't hear about all this other gossip. And maybe it was just a different era because there was no internet back then. I'm sure that's a huge factor. There's no controversial tweets and all of this shit that surrounds the sport now. I just was at the gym today and I saw in passing, it was like a headline on SportsCenter, like, somebody is offended by one of the other players' tweets. We're going to get his thoughts on that. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? I just look at this level of minutia, this minute drama on a daily basis over tweets and all this bullshit. And I just think, sometimes I think we're better off without the internet, back in the 90s, it was just like pure sport. But what's a shame is I think we could actually have that today. I don't want to blame the internet for all that because I think the internet is kind of just more of the tool or the vehicle, right? By which all of this drama just spreads so rapidly. But I don't know. I just kind of pictured Michael Jordan in the year 2020, right? If he was in his prime today, based on the person he showed himself to be back then, I mean, he was pretty adamant about it. He's like, look, I'm a basketball player. This is my passion. This is what I do. I'm not into politics. I'm not well-versed on this candidate or that candidate. And I kind of admire his complete, utter dedication to his art form, to his sport, to basketball. Like everything I've said here today, like he was determined to be the best basketball player in the world. And that was his sole focus. And he would not get caught up in all of this drama and all these other things surrounding. Obviously, there was still drama in his life with the gambling and all these other things, but you could tell the overarching theme for him was competitiveness and a drive, a desire, a passion to be the best and for his team to be the best, for his team to win. And I think it was refreshing for me to see that. And it's almost like that's like a whole nother era, that was 20 plus years ago. And part of me kind of yearns for that because I'm just so sick of all the melodrama now and the politicking and the woke and this and that. And I'm just like, really? Do we have to know every player's political views and every player has to pick a side and, choose a candidate and all? It's like this intermingling of sports and political identity and all these things. It's like, can't sports just be sports? I don't know. Maybe I'm, again, hearkening back to a simpler time. Yes, it was a simpler time then without the internet, and I was younger too, but I don't know. Like, I think there's an idealistic part of me that would love to see a separation. I mean, just like we have separation of church and state, right? That idea. Why can't there be separation of sport and politics? Or sport and anything else? Because I think, getting back to the subject of sports, I think when people tune in to watch a sport, why do they tune in? Do they tune in to hear the political views of the basketball player or the football player or whatever? Or do they tune in to see what kind of statement they're going to be making about cultural? It's like, that's not why people watch sports or play sports or get into, people get into basketball because they love the sport. And they work hard and they want to excel, like everything that Jordan did, to be the best. That's what inspires people. And that's why people tune in, is to get away from the doldrums of their life, to get away from politics. And I mean, this year in particular, everything that's stressing everybody out. Wouldn't you love to just escape that for like an hour and watch a sport and enjoy the art form, you know? And I've been feeling that lately, even before the pandemic. Like, you know, some bunch of shows on Hulu and all this woke media shit. And I'm just like, if I turn on Netflix or Hulu or anything, like I want to watch a movie. I want to see a story. I want to be inspired. I want to laugh. I want to cry. I want to feel something. Like I want to go on an adventure, a ride. The same goes for sports too. Like I just want to watch the best athletes in the world perform and be excellent at what they do. Because for me, watching people be amazing at what they do, whether it's an art form or a sport or whatever, athletics, Olympics, it's inspiring and I love to watch it. I love to see it. It makes me feel almost sort of proud to be part of the human race, right? When I can see like, wow, human beings are amazing. You know, obviously not all human beings are Michael Jordan or near that amazing, but like I was saying earlier, we're all capable of that, you know? And that should be the purpose of sports. Is it should be a showcase of finely tuned athletes excelling at the highest level. That's what it should be. And that should be entertaining to regular average people out there who are going about their work, their job, their daily lives. It should be entertaining, but it should also be inspiring and uplifting. And that little form of escapism, because I know there's just a lot of dissatisfaction in life, in people's lives. And this is a bigger side topic, and I'm not really going to go in there. I might do a whole episode at some point on escapism, but you know, sports is a form of escapism. Alcohol, drugs, you know, sex, prostitution, like a lot of these things are in film, cinema, like, you know, shows, like just a lot of those things that we enjoy out there in life, they are forms of escapism. And video games. I can't believe I left out video games. That's a huge one. So when people spend hours and hours every day playing a video game, it's like that is largely because, well, they enjoy playing the video game more than they enjoy going out into the real world and living their lives. So all that being said, I just feel like, yeah, I feel like if Jordan was around today playing sports, I don't think he would be like all these other basketball players now, like trying to make a political statement or whatever. You know, I think he would still just be solely focused on winning and being the best, you know, but it's speculation, but that is how he handled the situation back then, 20 some years ago. So there's the precedent for that. So, but seeing him behave in that way and act in that way, I think it pissed off probably a certain, you know, population of people there. And I think maybe people watching it today, you know, maybe a lot of woke activists who happen to like basketball and sports, maybe they watched The Last Dance and they were disappointed in Jordan for his actions in that regard. But yeah, I just want to put that out there as my vote of, no, I actually like how he carried himself. And I like the fact that he stayed out of politics and stayed out of all this activism and all these other things. And he just focused on being the best player in the world, which he was. So yeah, I realize we're going over an hour here, and I'm going to have some conversations with some of you because I know Peter and a couple of you guys listening to this. I'll talk with you afterward. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on this episode, but I could go on, but I've kind of said my main points, my main takeaways from watching it. Again, it was just super nostalgic. It was super inspiring, but it also got me questioning concepts like greatness and sacrifice and competitiveness. And, you know, everything comes at a cost, right? So, you know, all those things that I've outlined today. And it was just really interesting too, like learning about Scottie Pippen, which I didn't really know that much about his upbringing and his life, and also Dennis Rodman. That was pretty interesting, as you would expect. And yeah, I remember hating the Detroit Pistons as a kid, but it's funny watching it over again now. It's almost like, wow, I think they were even nastier than I remember them being. So there's that. But yeah, I could definitely get into some more specifics, and I could get into the sort of emotional stuff with Jordan dealing with the murder of his father. Obviously, that was really moving and touching and depressing, and it's just really sad. It's tragic. I'm not going to get all into that now, though. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap this up. So this is the Last Dance episode. One other little tidbit, the soundtrack. Again, on the nostalgia factor, the soundtrack really took me back, but the soundtrack is great. If you go on Spotify, you can just do a search for the Last Dance soundtrack. And I don't know if it's like the official one or somebody just compiled it, but yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like just, yeah. Even if you don't care for basketball, you don't care for Jordan, if you just like music that would bring you back to the 90s, I highly recommend the soundtrack. Just go listen to it. Enjoy it. And that's all for today, folks. Episode number 23. So glad I got this out there. So this is for The Last Dance and Michael Jordan. Peace out, y'all. Until next time. Hey, you. Yes, you. I just wanted to say thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're currently listening on. That way you can obviously get notified as soon as new episodes arrive. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating and consider writing a brief review. It just takes a second, and it really helps in order to get this podcast ranking higher so that more people can discover it. And the better this podcast is doing, the more prominent guests we can get on the show, and also the more time I can devote to it, which means more episodes and better episodes. And speaking of better episodes, what would you like to see more of on the show? Are there specific topics you'd love to see covered? Do you have thoughts of your own on the subjects discussed today? I'd love to hear from you. Just shoot an email to podcast@introversion.com, or you can reach out to me on social media. I'm Jay Caslow on pretty much every platform, Twitter, Instagram, and the rest. And last but not least, if you've been enjoying listening to the podcast and also checking out the daily blog at introversion.com, I invite you to visit patreon.com/introversion, where you can become an official Introversion patron for as little as $3 a month. That's literally 10 cents a day. Anyway, just consider it. Otherwise, just click like, share this podcast with friends and family who you think would enjoy it. It's 2020, so be safe out there, and yet go live your life. I know that's kind of a paradox, but we'll figure this out one way or another. Anyway, have a good one. Until next time.